Welcome to another session of Art and Prayer, where we encounter God by looking at artwork, listening to Scripture, and allowing God to speak to our hearts, minds, and spirits in deep and contemplative ways. I am so glad that you have decided to participate in this particular time, and look forward to looking at the painting with you today as we seek to draw closer to God. Our guide again this week is Juliet Benner in her book Contemplative Vision, A Guide to Art and Prayer. And we will be using many of the sections from her chapter 10 to guide us in our contemplation and to help us understand the work of art that we will be looking at today. She says in that chapter, sometimes our daily experience is dark and burdensome, yet the light of God is always present, piercing the gloom of our earthly struggles. Jesus continually enters into every experience of our life with his hand outstretched and invites us to turn to him. His presence is sometimes difficult to discern, but if we practice being aware, awake, and attentive, we will know that he has entered our room and called us by name. Then we can turn and respond with a resounding yes to his love and light. Matthew's first encounter with Jesus is a story that tells us about his response to Jesus' love. Now we need to know that Matthew is also called Levi in the biblical texts at places. Both of those names are used for him. The account of Matthew, or Levi's call, is recorded in the three Gospels. Matthew and Mark describe the event in concise and direct language. No elaborations, simply stating that Matthew rose and followed. Luke's description is similarly plain, but adds that Matthew left everything behind and immediately followed Jesus. So we're going to look at the passage from Luke chapter 5, verses 27 through 32. Allow yourself to daydream as you read it, placing yourself imaginatively in the scene. Be there in the scene, and experience it with all of your senses fully alert. Note what is happening. Attend to sounds, smells, sights, and actions. Afterward, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector named Levi, sitting at a kiosk for collecting taxes. Jesus said to him, "Follow me." Levi got up, left everything behind, and followed him. Then Levi threw a great banquet for Jesus in his home. A large number of tax collectors and others sat down to eat with them. The Pharisees and their legal experts grumbled against his disciples. They said, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" Jesus answered, "Healthy people don't need a doctor, but sick people do. I didn't come to call righteous people, but sinners, to change their hearts and lives." What words or phrases jumped out for you as you listened to that scripture? What words seemed important? Where was God calling you to begin to listen? as you reflect upon those words and those phrases, let us now look more closely at the Calling of St. Matthew by Caravaggio. This painting is Caravaggio's meditation on the simple story of a man called Levi sitting in his tax office while Jesus passes by, sees him, and calls him to follow. As you look at the painting, what is the first thing that catches your eye? Perhaps it is the beam of light, or maybe it is Jesus' hand, the window, the group of men at the table on the left, or the two men on the right of the painting. Whatever it is, pause for a moment to look and reflect. Spend time on this first impression and see where it takes you. What questions does it ask of you? How do you respond? Hold on to those things as we look across the painting in greater detail. On the left is a group of 5 men seated at a table, dressed in the contemporary European style of Caravaggio's time. On the right are 2 other men, one of them Jesus, who enter the darkened room. They are clothed in the attire of Jesus' day. This contrast underscores the fact that Jesus spans all time and all ages to call people to follow him. Jesus did not come just to call those of his own period in history, but all people across all time. Let's look more carefully at this left side of the painting. Recall what had happened before this moment. Jesus had noticed the tax collector and called out to him to follow. Here, Matthew sits with 4 other people. His right hand is suspended over the table as he holds some of the money that is being counted. He's recording his day's take. With his left hand, Matthew points to himself with his index finger. Matthew may be wondering if Jesus really means him. He seems to be astonished that God's light and love would rest on him, and we can almost hear him asking the question, "Who? Me?" Switch your attention for a moment to the right side of the painting. Jesus stands with Peter, who has already been called and has decided to follow. The artist places Jesus in the darkest side of the painting and behind the disciple. He's not easy to find in the darkness. There's a faint halo around his head to ensure that we do not miss who he is. His hand reaches out from the darkness and points authoritatively and decisively toward Matthew. Yet it is also a gentle hand, a hand that is offering life and forgiveness. It is an inviting hand. Jesus never calls us coercively or with force. His face, in the half-light, looks at the tax collector with compassion and love. Back to the left side of the painting, notice the two figures at the furthest left of the painting. One sits totally engrossed in something on the table. If we really look closely, we see that he is counting some coins on the table. On the table, we see also a pen in an inkwell and a ledger for recording the day's payments. Another man leans over this seated figure as he adjusts his spectacles to get a closer look at the prophets. He seems to be the oldest in the group. Both are so absorbed in their business that they don't even notice that Jesus has entered the room. They seem oblivious to the invitation offered to Matthew. With eyes focused on more earthly things, they miss Jesus entirely and miss their opportunity to be invited to new life in Christ. The two younger men, on Matthew's left, are curious at this interruption in their affairs. One leans forward and seems to be engaged in conversation with Peter. The youngest one leans on Matthew and appears hesitant, looking dubiously on, seeming to pull back slightly from the pair who have entered his space, unsure of what this encounter may mean for him. He and his companion on the bench notice the cause of this interruption, become interested, and begin to be engaged. In your imagination, take a step into the painting and try to identify with each of the characters. There's a space at the table for you, too. What would you be preoccupied with when Jesus enters your dark room? Where is your focus? What is on your table in front of you that engrosses you? Do you even notice when Jesus enters? Having looked at the painting, let's return to the scripture. As we do, listen not so much for the story, but for the sections that speak to you today. Afterward, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at a kiosk for collecting taxes. Jesus said to him, "Follow me." Levi got up, left everything behind, and followed him. Then Levi threw a great banquet for Jesus in his home. A large number of tax collectors and others sat down to eat with them. The Pharisees and their legal experts grumbled against his disciples. They said, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" Jesus answered, "Healthy people don't need a doctor, but sick people do. I didn't come to call righteous people, but sinners to change their hearts and lives." As we look at the painting again, notice the window that takes up such a large space in the painting. The panes form an obvious cross, and Caravaggio places Jesus' hand immediately below it. What is it like to have the full force of the light of God shine on you? How does this light enable you to see yourself and everything in a new way? What would you have to abandon in order to more fully follow Jesus? Listen as God speaks to you and gives you guidance. We began with a first impression of the painting. Spend some time looking again at the painting now. What has changed for you? What do you see differently? This time of looking at the painting and of hearing the scripture may be calling you to respond. Take a moment and speak to God about your response, as if Jesus is in the room there with you, hand outstretched, inviting you to respond. Finish up your time of prayer now. Recall what God has led you to see and hear and experience, and how you have responded. This painting can be a powerful one of looking at the various ways that people respond to the call of God in their lives. You may need more time further thoughts, to more carefully discern what God is calling you to do or be. Keep coming back to that thought throughout this next week. Again, I thank you for joining with me in this holy time of sacred encounter with God. And I pray that as you listen to the call of God, God would be leading you into the powerful light, the deepest love, and the discovery of who you best are as transformed by Christ. We'll see you again next week as we again use art and prayer to draw closer to God.